So you've done the greeting. And essentially what we want to be doing here is we want to practice that as often as possible. In the segments underneath the video, you'll be seeing instructions, forms, suggestions, role play ideas, in order for you to be able to practice what it is I'm telling you. It's really, really important here, not to just sit back and listen. I know while that might be tempting, I think it's really, really important for you to pause the video or to once the video is over, to practice between each other. If you're doing this in a group, ideally have somebody next to you. Practice what I've done between yourselves, so that you're not just listening to the information, you're actually doing the information. If you're doing it, you're much, much more likely to retain it. And that's exceedingly important, because while you can come back and listen to this again and again, without doing it, it's really, really hard to put it into long-term memory. So I encourage you to follow the instructions after the video as much as you are listening to me now. So I'm going to move on now to the bridging question. You've done the greeting, but we need a bridge to take us from the greeting to the next step, which is Act 2, the opening. And that bridging question gives us permission to move to the next step. Now, you might notice that I really emphasize asking a lot of questions. And in fact, I believe that you can conduct an entire telephone call simply by asking questions throughout everything you say. Everything you say can be followed by a question. What this accomplishes is that it encourages a leadership stance. You are in complete control of the conversation when you're asking questions. If you look at two people having a conversation, the person who's asking the questions is typically the person in charge. It's typically the person with the most power. This is what happens in interview settings. You show up at an interview, you sit there, and the interviewer asks you questions. You answer them. They're in control. This is not what this is about. The patient is not interviewing you. You're interviewing the patient. That's the difference. So you're in charge of asking the questions, and they are actually applying to become your patient. Do you see the difference in the terms of mentality? So anyway, I'm going to get into the bridging question now, which is essentially, is it okay if I ask you a few questions so that I can get to know your needs better? And that's it. That's the question. So is it okay if I ask you a few questions so that I can get to know your needs better? And what that basically does is it gives you permission. Pretty much every time you ask that question, people are going to say, yeah, absolutely, no problem whatsoever. Yep, go ahead. The reason that is because they're actually starting to follow you. They're actually beginning to have some trust in you, that you actually know what you're doing. And they want you to ask them questions because they know that the more information they provide you, the better your recommendations are going to be. So with that said, I want to encourage you to have confidence in asking this question. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions now so that I can get to know your needs better? What that accomplishes as well is it gives you permission to get to the next step, which is the opening. You're going to be asking 10 questions, some of which you might feel are quite sensitive, some of which patients might not understand why you're asking those questions. What I have found, however, is that if you ask this bridging question, you're able to get patients' cooperation in such a way that's much better than if you didn't ask it. They have now consistently applied or rather follow the rule, which is if I give you permission to do something, then I'm going to continue to give it to you. It's the rule of consistency. And essentially what will happen next is that they'll be a lot more open with you as you ask the questions that you need to ask in order to open them up in the opening.